Alright, so we are in the final part. For this year, I've done something different. Last year, I spread series out by weekly things, so like one series would take over. Like for instance, the Hannibal series from History March came every Friday. I mean every Monday, while like Julius Caesar from Kings and Generals went every Wednesday, so it made series going through them quicker. This year, I've decided to just upload all series at once. So you'll see, I think in a way it'll make series go quicker for all of you, and we get through them. And as you can see now, I binged watched the whole Great Northern War. I started hours ago, and now we're here. um, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be watching the hour-long versions. I like the parts. But I know this offered way more info than Kings and Generals original parts that were broken, so I get that. So either way, this is the final part. I'm really looking forward to getting through it. I had to conserve my energy the last few videos, and to do this, we're basically running a marathon right now with these longer videos, so I have to be careful. Let's get to it.
Final great continental army neutralized, Peter I of Russia was finally able to retire to his new capital and enjoy his favorite pastime, the navy. The commander of the Russian army in Germany, Menshikov, had no time to celebrate after his victory. He besieged Sweden's 3 strongholds once again, and extorted a large sum of money from the city of Hamburg as punishment for aiding the Swedes. The Tsar would use that money to purchase several state-of-the-art ships from the Dutch. Even though he was winning on all fronts, Peter wished to make peace as soon as possible. Continuous wars had a devastating effect on Russia, and the threat of a new war with the Ottomans was looming. To his joy, however, Charles had been arrested by the Sultan for conspiracy, and Crimean raids were becoming increasingly rare. This allowed him to
Yo, I like Charles at first. I've kind of turned on him. I mean, I don't hate him, mind you. It's just like, what I mean is he started off really well, but then I noticed the first red flag was him not willing to make peace with anyone, which I kind of got with Augustus. Like, you know, like, I know they were men of their word, but he could have used brief peaces to, like, have some rest, but he refused with Augustus completely, and then he refused when Peter, you know, was offering him peace for a bit, and he just refused, and then he got wrecked, completely defeated, and now that he's defeated, he still refuses to make peace. Like, okay, switch Napoleon. Oh, dang it. So yeah, switch Napoleon and, like, Charles. If Charles was, like, let's just say the leader of the French during the Napoleonic Wars, the moment, like, Austria, Emperor Francis first declares war on Napoleon, let's say, like, the Third Coalition, Charles would have rejected every offer and keep fighting Austria until trying to remove Francis from power, and then at the same time ignoring Russia while Prussia joins in the war, and then it would have been all of them versus them. Like, and if Napoleon were here in Charles' position, probably would have made peace a long time ago, maybe when Augustus first offered peace, and then he would have went and fought Russia. I know I'm, like, switching them up, but, like, you see where I'm getting at, right? Like, Charles, you needed to know when to stop. You needed to know, I think he should have, like, accepted one of Augustus's earlier offers of peace and then jumped straight over and start handling Russia, because he essentially ignored the Baltic stage because he was too busy refusing to have peace with Augustus, trying to create this weird, like, remove him from power, replace him with another monarch. This whole situation he wasted time over, when he should have been dealing with Russia immediately, get Poland, Saxon out of the way the moment they first make their first few peace offers. But instead, he was relentless in stopping these two, ignoring Russia, and then when he finally got around to fighting Russia, he got wrecked, and now he has refused to make peace. He had a chance to go home to Sweden and like regroup, reevaluate, but instead he stayed in the Ottoman Empire, trying to get them to fight, and now he's arrested. Yo, Charles, like my estimate of him kind of went down as the series has gone on. First I was impressed, now I'm like, like, way too much. You're too stubborn, man. You're too stubborn and relentless, and it ain't good.
Focus on Sweden's final frontier, Finland. With new troops and resources, Admiral Apraksin was able to swiftly advance into southern Finland. The new Russian navy played a pivotal role during the Finnish campaign, as supply shortages were the main cause of Russian failures there after the capture of Viborg. Peter refused to risk the expensive Dutch ships of the line for such operations, instead opting to use the much larger and easily replaceable galley fleet. By transporting his men behind the Swedish army, Peter was able to force General Liebecker to retreat several times, until he was finally replaced by a more capable commander. On the 8th of May 1713, a large Russian army was able to land near Helsinki. The Swedes, now under the command of Armfeldt, managed to defend the city for some time. In the end, the size of the Russian army proved to be too much for the small Swedish force, and Armfeldt ordered a retreat to Porvoo, though not before burning Helsinki and all of its supplies. In September, the Russian army captured Turku, thereby securing the entire southern coast of Finland. Around the same time, one of Sweden's strongholds in Pomerania, Stettin, fell as well. The city was immediately given to the Prussians, who did not have to fire a single bullet in the conflict. Stralsund and Wismar still held strong, however the Allied noose was tightening around them. At this point, the Swedish government in Stockholm did not view Finland as an important theatre in the war. Therefore, very little was done to combat the Russian fleet's dominance in the area, and Armfeldt had to rely only on local recruits for his small army. After the fall of Turku, Armfeldt placed his army in a defensive position near the next great Finnish city on the Russian warpath, Tampere. In October, he faced a 5 times larger Russian army at the Battle of Palikkani. Armfeldt took up defensive positions with his troops on an isthmus near Tampere, between the lakes of Palkanivesi and Malavesi. He had approximately 3,700 men under his command, with 2,200 footmen and 1,500 cavalry, together with 28 light field guns. The cavalry was placed a bit further from the rest of the troops, near the village of Malkila. Apraksin made his base in a village on the other side of the isthmus. His army numbered 14,000 men and 22 guns. The main Russian army was split in 2 halves, one led by Bruce and another by Golovin. 3 squadrons were also prepared especially for an amphibious assault, and they were led by Golitsyn. The battle started on the morning of the 17th of October. Apraksin realized immediately that the well-entrenched Finnish army was in an excellent defensive position. A frontal attack under such circumstances would have been extremely costly. Therefore, he opted to send Golitsyn's amphibious assault units to the west side of the isthmus, while the main force feigned a full frontal assault. At the time when they reached the land near Malkila, the Finnish cavalry were still in their quarters. When they finally attacked Golitsyn's men, it was already too late, as the prepared Russian soldiers repulsed them with ease. On the east side of the isthmus, Russian troops repeatedly tried to cross the river, however they were beaten back with heavy losses each time. The mounting pressure on that side of the battlefield did have its purpose, as it diverted attention away from Golitsyn's force. At the beachhead, increasing numbers of Russian troops started gathering. To combat this, Armfeldt sent his reserves there. The infantry performed well and killed many Russians. Nevertheless, the subpar performance of the Finnish cavalry proved critical for this battle. It did not take long for the Russian soldiers to rout them, and the infantry, heavily outnumbered, was forced to retreat. With the disorderly retreat of their western flank, the rest of the Finnish army risked being surrounded. Armfeldt also realized this and ordered the rest of the army to retreat. The soldiers there, emboldened by their success, refused to do so. It was only when the Russian cavalry crossed that they were persuaded to flee. Because of the delay, it was possible for the Russian cavalry to harass the retreating soldiers, forcing them to leave most of their artillery behind. Still, the Finnish army lived to fight another day, since they managed to retreat with minimal casualties. They lost around 800 men, while the Russian army suffered a similar number of losses. The two armies met once again at Napue in February 1714. This time around, the Finnish army was decisively defeated. Armfeldt retreated with the remnants of his army to Sweden proper, leaving Finland at the mercy of the Russian occupier. Peter had absolutely no ambition of conquering Finland, and viewed it merely as a bargaining chip to be used to strengthen his position at the negotiating table once the Swedes were actually willing to negotiate. Until then, the land would be thoroughly ravaged in what became known as the Greater Wrath or the Great Hatred. Until the end of the war, Russian soldiers would commit innumerable atrocities in Finland. Looting, rape, torture and murder were widespread, and a large number of Finns were forced to move inland. The Finns also engaged in guerrilla warfare, prompting further retaliation from the Russians. Thousands of men were taken as slaves to St. Petersburg to be used as forced labor in Peter's dockyards or on his many architectural projects. Many children were taken from their homes as well to be used as future soldiers and sailors. The plague had also struck Finland during the occupation, further devastating the area. As in Finland the Russians were at Sweden's doorstep, the ruling council finally decided to ramp up their efforts in the eastern Baltic. A strong Swedish navy under Admiral Vatrang was finally sent to Finland. With their navy unable to enter the Gulf of Bothnia, Russian troops in the areas north of Turku began suffering from supply shortages. The land-based supply routes were slow and insecure, forcing the Russians to divert further resources to the area, resources that Peter would have wanted to use elsewhere. In spring, the Russians finally decided to try to sail by the coast of western Finland. However, a small Swedish force sank most of their ships.
Find the lowest priced health plans at healthforcalifornia.com.
In May, Vatrang sailed towards Revel to see if he could capture the city. Upon seeing the improved coastal batteries in the area and several Russian ships of the line moored in the port, he decided that it would be foolish to attempt any kind of assault on the city. Meanwhile, Apraxin sailed from Kronstadt with a large fleet, hoping to tempt Vatrang into a naval encounter in the shallow coastal seas. The two navies met near Cape Hanko on the 29th of June. Although numerically superior, the Russians had far weaker ships than their Swedish counterparts, and their sailors were less experienced. Knowing that his galleys would be decimated in the open sea, Apraxin withdrew all of his ships east of the peninsula, where he awaited further reinforcements from Helsinki. He also informed Peter, who was in Revel, of the situation, and requested that he bring all of the Russian ships of the line with him. Peter joined Apraxin on the 20th of July. However, he deemed the odds too unfavourable to bring his new ships. Galleys had one specific advantage in shallow seas compared to ships of the line. They depended on rowing and could move even when there was no wind. As Golitsyn and his men were now suffering from severe supply troubles, it was imperative for the Russian fleet to reach Turku as soon as possible. Peter's initial idea was to transport the galleys over the Hanko Isthmus. This idea was abandoned after a few days as the task was time-consuming and the ships were severely damaged. Vatrang was unaware that the Russian plan had failed and sent a detachment of 10 ships under Rear Admiral Arenhold to the north of the peninsula. The rest of the Swedish fleet sailed towards the Russian force. Unfortunately for Vatrang, the weather calmed down on the 26th, and his wind-dependent ships of the line could not move further than Hanko. Peter realized what kind of an opportunity had just presented itself and he sent a vanguard of several ships to bypass Vatrang's fleet and engage Arenhold. Fearing that the rest of the Russian galleys would catch his ships in the shallow coastal waters, Vatrang sailed south, allowing the opposing forces to pass without any.
Yo, that sucks. He literally separated himself, and now he's stranded because of the air. And Peter's like, alright, just thanks. Thanks for the opportunity, loser. Dang, dude. Yo, Charles. Yo, that sucks.
Any resistance. Arenhold, also unable to move, was caught by the large Russian fleet. Apraxin initially tried to convince him to surrender without a fight. Arenhold refused, telling the envoys, "The king did not give me command of these ships so that I would surrender them without a fight. The Tsar can expect nothing from me and my subordinates other than strong resistance." The Swedish fleet consisted of 1 pram, 6 galleys and 2 skerryboats. The ships were arrayed in a semi-crescent in between 2 islands, with the pram in the center and 3 galleys on each side, while the skerryboats were placed behind the line and did not engage in the battle. Apraxin had 98 ships under him, mostly galleys and half-galleys. Only around a quarter of that number would actually engage in the battle. 11 ships in the center, 6 on each flank, and 4 small ones would later attack from behind. The battle started on the morning of the 27th with massive artillery barrages from both sides. The artillery duel was in no way decisive, with ships on both sides sustaining only minimal damage. The Swedish ships carried superior artillery compared to their Russian counterparts. Due to their numbers, the Russians would have won even during a prolonged artillery battle, though with far heavier casualties. With the smoke from the artillery providing cover, the Russian fleet advanced simultaneously towards the Swedish line. This had 2 effects. The Swedish boats would not be able to concentrate their fire as effectively, and the Russian ships would decisively outnumber the Swedish ones. All 11 ships in the Russian center were ordered to advance towards the Swedish pram, called Elephant. Not only was that ship of the line the biggest threat to the Russian fleet, but Peter also wanted to capture it for his own collection. As the Russian ships were approaching, the Russian soldiers and sailors fired at the Swedes with their rifles. The Swedes, who were already heavily outnumbered, could not even mount a proper defense due to relentless incoming fire. The Russian troops began boarding the Swedish ships, and fierce close-quarters combat ensued. The Swedes fought bravely. However, it was only a matter of time until Russian numbers overwhelmed them. To Arenhold's surprise, 4 Russian gunboats went through a narrow passage between the island on their left and the mainland. Those gunboats subsequently attacked the Swedish galleys on the left and captured or sank all of them. The Swedish galleys on the right fell one by one as well, with only the Elephant still resisting. After a fire broke out on the Elephant, Arenhold was captured and the ship was taken over by the Russians. In the end, the Swedish lost all of their ships and men, while the Russian casualties amounted to several hundred men. Though the battle had little to no effect on the Swedish navy, its implications were substantially foreboding. The Russians would now be able to launch devastating raids into Sweden, and the numerically inferior Swedish navy could do little to nothing about it. Indeed, the Åland archipelago was captured later that year, and Umeå was sacked. Vatrang retreated with his fleet to Sweden. However, his failing.
Yo, can I just say that Peter must be elated? Look, he defeats Charles. Charles never comes back essentially into the picture. So this dude is just playing on easy mode now. He's just going around taking whatever he wants, taking ships, building his collection. I get the impression that he's just having so much fun right now. It's like taking candy from a baby. Like, you get what I'm getting at, right? Like, dang, Peter, you have just won completely. And this is what happens when you don't make peace quickly, even when you're beaten or when you're in victory. You let something drag on, it's just, look, all of that now is completely Peter's. Yep, that all Charles, man. All Charles's fault.
Health prevented him from taking any initiative in the following years. The Swedish defeat caused a sense of panic in Stockholm, and the nobility felt that now it would only be a matter of time before the Russians struck at the capital. Having no other alternative, the Swedish Council of State sent a letter to Charles, informing him that they would start negotiations towards an achievable peace with the coalition unless he returned as quickly as possible. With the Sultan's appetite for war diminished, Charles made an obvious choice. Charles was now determined to reach his homeland, and he rode through Europe at a tremendous speed. He reached Stralsund in November, only 2 weeks after leaving Istanbul. He reached Stralsund.
Okay. That's a nice... The Swedish meatballs. Yo, Charles, you should have returned earlier. Like, this whole stupid idea of getting the Ottomans, trying to convince them to declare war, getting yourself arrested. Like, if he had returned earlier, even then, I think he could have put up a bit better fights, you know? He hasn't commanded in a while. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah, I feel like my estimation of Charles, who I liked a lot at the beginning, just fell by this point. Like, I just, like... I'm just kind of seeing a lot of his failure, and I'm like, I've kind of soured on him. I don't hate him, mind you. I'm not like, oh, Charles sucks, I hate him. Like, you know, I'm not like that, but I can't pretend that I like him that much, or at least as much as I used to, you know? So, yeah.
In November, only 2 weeks after leaving Istanbul. In the following months, Charles started looking for new allies against the coalition. Frederick Wilhelm of Prussia was willing to join the war on Sweden's side in exchange for having Stettin recognized as his own. This did not go well with Charles's no-inch lost doctrine, so he refused.
Oh my gosh, Charles, you need to give it up. You've lost the opportunity. You've lost the advantage and the position of strength to make that kind of demand of not an inch. You need to make concessions now. You had your chances to make peace at a position of strength, and you refused all of them. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm like frustrated by this guy now. But come on, Charles.
Prussia would enter the war against Sweden in 1715, the same year as Hanover did. In November 1715, a combined Danish-Saxon-Prussian army landed on the island of Rügen. Charles's attempt to stop their advance failed, and he was forced to return to Stralsund. The king's presence may have encouraged his men to continue their stalwart defense, yet the fall of the city was inevitable. With Stralsund surrounded on all sides, Charles left for Sweden on the 22nd of December, merely 2 days before the city fell. 15 years and 3 months after his departure, Charles was finally on the soil of his homeland. This left Sweden with only Wismar on the continent. However, the city fell in 1716 too. Bremen-Verden was partially occupied by Denmark and partially by Hanover. However, George I gained all of it after paying a substantial sum to the Danish king. In 1716, the Allied powers gathered their fleets in Copenhagen and planned a massive assault on the Swedish mainland, with Peter as its commander. Frederick
They literally formed an entire coalition to take this one place down. Dang.
the Fourth of Denmark grew suspicious of Peter's Baltic ambitions, however, refusing to partake in any future actions. Frustrated at this lack of trust between allies, Peter called off the invasion. The loss of Sweden's last holdings on the continent gave both the people and the nobility hope that the war would finally end. Nevertheless, Charles was still determined to continue fighting. More war meant more men and more money, yet Sweden was devastated. Half the farmland was not cultivated because there were no labourers. Fisheries were abandoned. Foreign trade was ruined by the blockade of the Allied fleets. The fact that Charles was able to continue the war in spite of all this seems like nothing short of a miracle. This was only possible due to the appearance of Yuri Heinrich von Goetz as Charles's advisor. His administrative skill allowed Charles to raise another army, though his brutal methods only caused further dissent within the kingdom. Goetz also used the distrust among the allies to strengthen Sweden's diplomatic position. By playing George I and Peter against each other, Charles received several relatively favourable separate peace offers. This would have allowed Charles to focus on recovering his Pomeranian possessions. Goetz continuously tried to convince Charles to accept peace with Russia, in what can only be described as a Sisyphean task. To his credit, he did manage to wear down the stubborn king to accept the loss of Karelia and Ingria. Charles invaded Norway in 1716 in order to knock Denmark out of the war. However, the campaign was slow and costly. Finally, it would all be for naught, as on the 30th of November 1718, Charles was shot in the head and killed while besieging Frederikshamn. Whether it was a bullet from the Norwegian defenders or from one of his own men is still a matter of intense debate, as both are distinct possibilities. The beleaguered Swedish army then returned to Sweden with their king's body. While crossing the Scandinavian mountains, thousands would die due to cold and starvation. The last hope of reviving the Swedish Empire died along with Charles. As Charles neither married nor sired any offspring.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Charles, you frustrated me beyond end. Like, I think I haven't turned on anyone the longer a series went on than I have on Charles. Like, oh my goodness. This man didn't know how to say yes to any peace. He woke up every morning and chose violence. He's literally the embodiment of the meme. Peace was never an option. It never was. Whether he was winning, whether he was losing, there was never going to be peace with Charles. The peace wasn't even in the man's vocabulary. He didn't even know the meaning of the word. And he got himself murdered when he should have made peace and refocused on getting Sweden strong and just making do with what it was. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I've turned on this dude. Like, dumb, bro. What a dumb you are. Like... And then you didn't even bother to have every monarch needs an heir. Like, you can't just leave for 15... Oh my god. I know he was busy, but like, somewhere in between... It's like the Belisarius... Not Belisarius, like, Dang, who's that guy we covered? Oh, it was Basil. Yeah, Basil II. Like, great. You can be as good as a ruler as you want, but if you don't have a monarch, then you need to set up the most important job of a monarch. One of the most important jobs is to have an heir to make sure if something happens to you, things go on smoothly. Like, gosh, I'm done. I can't with Charles right now.
He was succeeded by his sister, Ulrika Eleonora. She decided to renounce her absolute powers, and a period of parliamentary rule in Sweden would ensue. With his protector now dead, Goetz was also imprisoned and executed. Ulrika Eleonora would abdicate in 1720 in favour of her husband, Frederick of Hesse, who held virtually no power. In late 1719 and early 1720, Sweden signed the Treaties of Stockholm with Hanover and Prussia. Sweden ceded Bremen-Verden to Hanover and Stettin to Prussia. In the summer of 1720, Sweden and Denmark signed the Treaty of Frederiksborg, according to which Sweden would regain Wismar and Stralsund, while also losing their exemption from the Sound toll and paying war reparations to Denmark. Denmark would also gain part of Holstein-Gottorp. Saxony, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Sweden did not sign any peace treaty. Instead, they renewed the Treaty of Oliva from 1660. the last few years of the war were fairly quiet. Russian raids around Stockholm and Umeå are the only few exceptions. Though they did not have a profound effect on the war, they made the Swedish Riksdag increase their efforts at achieving peace. The final peace treaty was made at Nystad on the 10th of September 1721. Russia would gain Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, parts of Karelia and Viborg, while Finland would be returned to Sweden, together with 2 million thalers in war reparations. Sweden was now reduced to merely a regional power, would be gripped by the conflict between the monarchy and the parliament, and revanchism against Russia would dominate its foreign affairs. Poland-Lithuania would lose all semblance of central authority. The once powerful Commonwealth would become a battleground for Europe's empires in the next century. Denmark would enter a period of stability, while Prussia, similarly to Russia, would continue its growth on the European stage. The power vacuum left by Sweden would be filled by the ever-growing Russian Empire, which would dominate European affairs in the coming centuries. The Great Northern War completely changed the balance of power in Europe. Not only that, but it also marks a turning point in European history. Wars would have a European rather than a regional nature, as an increasing number of countries would become involved in each other's affairs and conflicts. We'll talk about the region's history more in the coming months, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. These long videos take so long to make, so please consider.
And I appreciate you very much for making them. I just binged watch this whole entire series all in one go. I'm tired at the moment, but dang, dude, just like, ugh. But that was super interesting, though. That was an interesting conflict. I loved it. Like, it's so cool to see how the dynamic was in Europe, because I was very unfamiliar with the power balance. Seeing how powerful Sweden was is insane. And it's just so cool to see how at first they were doing so well, and then just couldn't win afterwards. Just... yeah. Overall, that was just an interesting series. I loved it, and I'm looking forward to more from Kings and Generals. So guys, this has been fun. I will see you all in the next one. Bye everyone.